The Ktunaxa creation story actually sets us down in our territory, and it sets up relationships between the Ktunaxa people and all of the other creatures across our lands. So when we were brought about, when the Ktunaxa people were born, all of the other animals and all of the other creatures basically presented themselves to us and said what they would do for us. And then it was known by our spiritual interference what we would do for them. So we had an intervention basically as we were born as the Ktunaxa people, and the spirits of the world at that time gave us an enlightenment and gave us a responsibility. And that's where our stewardship comes from. It's all about relationship. Everything we do, how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to our family, how we relate to our environment. Our relationships have been badly damaged by history. Long time ago, very good relationships. Relationships of the family pulled apart, relationships just pulled apart. Our social support networks and everything damaged by them. We also know that our communities, where the people live, sometimes don't have all of the infrastructure that might be needed for people to be strong and healthy. And so sometimes that brings about a sense of tension and a sense of expectation. Sometimes it brings about poor relationships. In fact, I think there's one thing that almost every First Nation community has in common, and that's a lack of trust. A lack of trust in self, a lack of trust in what's going to happen around me, a lack of trust in the band council, a lack of trust of the federal provincial government, a lack of trust of that institution or this institution, because historically they haven't necessarily met the needs of the people or been respectful to the cultures of the people. They just haven't served the people well. And so relationships and rebuilding relationships is absolutely a central focus of our work. Having people be able to actually say what it is they're feeling. That is a huge challenge for us. We have people who are so anxious about things that to speak kindly, to speak productively is challenging. We're so frustrated with things. But in our frustration, sometimes we lose out on opportunity. Sometimes when we're angry, we don't see that there is some goodness in front of us. And so our elders have always told us that we have to check our anger. Check your anger. Bring the good, positive energy forward. Create the energy you want to have given back to you. Build the relationship you want from the person. Don't expect the person to come with open heart, open mind, and will. We've got to actually create the right environment for people to feel like they can speak freely, that they're supported. And rebuilding relationships is not an easy thing. It's a time-intensive thing. Sometimes you can't even have a meeting in a community because there's so much tension and anxiety. It turns into a stress match. So we know sometimes we actually have to take it outside of the meeting. Our people behave differently when we actually are in cultural construct. When we're in a place where the culture is dominant, our behavior is different. We become humble, respectful. We become Ktunaxa. When we go into the boardroom and we're talking about programs and services, we become different. Our behavior changes. And so we know that we have to rebuild relationships inside the community, inside the family, but also across communities. We have to be able to work community to community with our neighboring communities. Sometimes we might be able to share a water system, a sewage system, share a human resource function. We could do all kinds of things working collaboratively, but we haven't been conditioned for that. We've been conditioned to compete. Compete for the dollar, compete for the program, compete, compete, compete. Competition means there's a winner and a loser. We were trained under traditional ways that collaboration, cooperation is what actually gets everybody to the place where we're all winners. So we've got a lot of institutions that have been built over time. We've got First Nations organizations, we've got federal and provincial governments, we've got nonprofits that are our mainstream nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, or whatever that word is. I have a hard time with that one. Places that want to give you money. But if you don't have a good plan, if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, chances are people are not going to invest in you. So we have to have capacity to get capacity. We have to build relationships sometimes to actually understand what capacity needs are there in a community. So we have an opportunity in front of us with what's called the Community Development Strategy, the Indigenous Community Development Strategy. It's the federal government, Indigenous Services Canada, coming around and saying, okay, we get it. We're not the be-all and end-all. If we were actually good at doing what we do, if we were good at serving the people would probably be a lot healthier than they are right now. They would probably be a lot more successful than they are right now. So it's acknowledged that federal and provincial governments, maybe they don't have all the right equipment, right tools, right relationships, but they got a lot of resources. So we've got to create partnerships, and we've got to create investment mechanisms that cut away a lot of the craziness, of the bureaucratic craziness, and look directly at what the communities are trying to achieve. We have to look into the community to see what it is they're trying to develop and invest in them wherever they are. So if we think about a community, my own nation, 4 communities, I could look at a trajectory towards full self-determination, vibrancy, all of those healthy, beautiful things, and look at my 4 communities. One's part way off the starting gate, one's midway, one's 3/4, and one is almost there. Literally, we can look in our communities and see the difference on where they are along the road towards being self-determining and healthy again. So we're all at different places along the journey, and we might need different resources. We might need different partnerships along that journey. So sometimes it's hard for us to find those partnerships. So other governments, federal, provincial, our own First Nations organizations, they got to change the way they do their business. This isn't the old days. This isn't about, oh, First Nations community, write a proposal and we'll give you some money. We're expecting different. We're expecting government to government, nation to nation. We're expecting direct investments from the other governments and partnerships, true partnerships. Not a, have we got a partnership for you way of thinking, but how do we grow this from the ground up? How do we actually meet the community where they are, invest in them, and more critically, have them tell themselves that they've changed, reflect back on themselves to celebrate the positive growth that's been there. Because right now, we don't know there's been positive growth. Right now, we're stuck in this system of measuring things like numbers of suicides, the numbers of cases of diabetes, the numbers of children that have died for various reasons. That is not an indicator of a healthy nation or community. In fact, I would suggest that those are indicators of things that are not going well. So part of our work moving forward is to envision what health and wellness is, each of us as nations, to create indicators or measurements that attach to those things, and to have the ability as a government, with information management and technology and policies and all of those things that we need, to actually tell our own story, to do those functions necessary to move ourselves along the process of development and tell ourselves the stories along the way. So in the community development strategy, again, the number 1 pillar is that it's community-driven and nation-based. And National Indigenous Services Canada, ready to stand back and say, all right, communities, tell us what it is you need. Tell us what it is you're going to do. Tell us what it is we can do for you. It's been an interesting first experience as we've gone out and tried to have some of these conversations with nations, because they don't trust Indigenous Services Canada. They don't trust headquarters. They don't trust the bureaucrats. We've got to trust. We've got to trust ourselves. And that's the big challenge. Do we trust ourselves to do this work? Well, we'd better, because our grandchildren, they can't wait any longer. There may never be another opportunity when the government of Canada is saying nation to nation is our number 1 priority. So we need to stand up, nations. Let's say who we are. Let's take on this responsibility again. Let's tell them what it is we need, but let's do it in a constructive way. Let's do it in a way where we're building relationships and rebuilding relationships in the form that we want to carry out the functions that we need. Government to government, nation to nation.